very warm welcome to you all this afternoon. Thank you to Soho Hotel for hosting us, and to Fashion and Cinema for organising this event. My name is Keith Lodwick, and I'm absolutely thrilled and delighted to be sitting here with Michele Clapton, who is going to tell us more about her incredible career and those incredible, memorable characters that you have created and given to the world over the last 25, 30 years. It's called Life Journeys, so we are going to begin at the very beginning. My first question really is about, were you always interested in clothing, in costume or clothing or fabrics? How did it begin?
I was, I guess, because I grew up in a tiny village just outside Oxford, and my dad owned the garage, and my mum sort of worked with him, and I had my younger sister. And I still remember now, I always used to prance about in front of the mirror with big turban towels on my head and thinking, I look very beautiful. What I'd like to do is, I used to do drawings of how I would like to look when I was grown up, and they're really funny to find them later. They're not like I turned out at all, actually. And then I used to have my Tressie dolls, and I made all the costumes for them. And I always remember I dressed the brown-haired Tressie doll better than the blonde, because I always thought it wasn't fair that blondes had more fun. And so I used to stuff the blonde one in the drawer, and the brown one used to sit on top of all these great outfits. And then I remember a little later on when I was at school, I somehow convinced my mother, and I still don't know quite how this happened, that so long as we used the school fabric, you could make any dress you liked. And actually what they were supposed to be were little A-line dresses. Mine was a bolero with this sort of, I think the dress was, and mine was A-line. And it took them about 3 days to realise I had a completely different look to anyone else. And when they said, look, you can't wear this, I said, my parents are too poor to change it. And so I got away with wearing it, I think, for about a year and a half. And my only other little story from there, which was very funny, I had this friend, someone I admired hugely in the year above me. And we used to sit in assembly on the floor with our feet out, and then we always used to check each other's shoes out. There's one pair of platform shoes which was just to die for. And she had them. But not only did she have them, she then scribbled on them. And to me, that was like amazing.
Yeah.
It was the essence of cool. It's like you have something that everyone else wants and you don't care. And to me, it was so exciting. And it stuck with me, and right through into the punk, I guess, and everything else.
Did you go to the theatre as a sort of child, or were you taken to the cinema? Were you sort of influenced by cinema? Did you enjoy cinema?
I remember going a few times, but I don't think we went a lot. I actually remember, it sounds very strange, my grandfather was a Salvation Army. He used to play the big horn, whatever. And we used to go to those sometimes, and they were quite big events. And I remember running to the stage a couple of times, wanting to join in. But not really. It was later on, I think, I became more involved. But I used to love things like the Singing Ringing Tree on the TV, and all these quite strange pieces. So I was always quite intrigued by those.
I also love that. I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah. That's a kind of European cult classic,
all those things on the BBC at the time, they're just so bizarre.
Yes, they're very surreal, aren't they?
Yeah, so I remember that a lot and really liking, and Sebastian and things like
that. Yes, yeah. And then you sort of come to London, and you enrol at the London College of Fashion. So were you drawn to the fashion world? Oh. Well,
it was funny. I think, again, coming from a small village, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. Then I don't think you had access to what was available. No. And I luckily had a careers teacher who said, what do you like? And I went, well, art and fashion. So he sort of said, well, look, there's this course in Oxford. So I went to the Oxford Polytechnic and did sitting gilt in pattern cutting and jewellery and things like that. And then I had my first company was called Perspiration de Paris, with a theology student from, I can't remember which college now. And from that, he took me to London. I remember doing the photographs for it in the National History Museum. And through my tutors there, I came to London College of Fashion. And I think I had interviews at St Martin's and London College of Fashion, but I didn't know the difference. I was so naive. Anyway, I arrived at London College of Fashion. I think it was good for me in many ways. It disciplined me. I was quite sort of all over the place and very avant-garde fashion, and although at the time I didn't like being disciplined and made to go and learn to pattern cut, I actually think it was probably quite good in the long run. So yeah, and I guess at that stage, yes, I was really into fashion. I thought that was my career.
And then we've got some great slides. You really, the Blitz Club, for perhaps younger viewers who don't know about it, perhaps could Google it later, check it. It becomes this kind of extraordinary venue.
Yeah.
And when you look back at how much creativity came from that moment and the Blitz Kids, and you were completely part of that.
Yeah, I remember my friend, this is my best friend Claire from college, and she was a year ahead of me, and I remember they kept saying, "You two have got to meet, you two." So eventually they put us together, and she asked me to go out to this club. And at the time I was working at the ICA in the evenings as in the cinemas and things, as an usherette between to make money after college. And she took me to the Blitz, and I just remember thinking, "Oh, I've come home." I just felt like finally I found all these people like me, that want to dress up and want to do these crazy things. And there was Stephen Jones. I mean, just so many people.
Boy George, Steve Strange, Spandau Ballet came out of it.
They were all there,
it was an extraordinary
and it was a
kind of moment, wasn't it? Club moment, people.
Exactly. And even other people I've realised more recently have more people. I mean, Princess Julia obviously does a lot of DJing now.
Yes,
but even there was a guy who's now the head of Island Records. And all these people were in this tiny club. And it was a very small group of people. But it was just incredibly freeing. And again, we didn't have mobile phones. I don't know how we ever all got together. And we were obviously ridiculed for how we looked. But it was also quite dangerous. I mean, we were picked on quite extensively. This was actually at St Martin's fashion show for my dear friend Stephen Linnard. It was his mid-season show. So he asked myself and Myra, the two bald ones, to model for him.
But it was an interesting moment, sort of like post-punk and that sort of slight sort of hiatus, and then this Blitz thing that happened, and then almost like the 80s almost begins from that, and so many people sort of came out of that.
My father was appalled. I remember, just like, "I thought you were at college." I went, "I am." It was like, it was quite tough for him, I think. Find all these photos in magazines of his wayward daughter.
But an extraordinary, as you say, I think, sort of freeing, creative period.
I think so, and I still think that this influenced me a lot in later life. Just the idea that just have this sense of freedom and try things and don't be too repressed in your ideas. I mean, you can always bring it back, but go out there to start with and then bring it back in. But it was a fun period, and again, I thought I was still into fashion then, and I think when you're at college, fashion is very different to the fashion industry that you later discover.
Yes, yes. And then in sort of the mid 1980s, you begin to design pop videos, which by then really had become art forms. It sort of began as a cottage industry in the 70s, but by the 80s, after Rio and Duran Duran and all this big budget, it was almost an art form in its own right. So how did you get involved with the kind of the pop videos?
Well, I think I sort of did 2 London Fashion Weeks, and then I also worked at the ICA and with Michael Morris and did a few collaborations with choreographers and fashion designers, because I liked the idea of, again, pushing it away from just being fashion catwalks, whatever. But I had started selling my collections, but it was really tough. I mean, a lot of people would only take sale or return, so all your money would be invested, and then sometimes they wouldn't pay, and it was just horrific. And there's a very dark side to the costume industry, the fashion industry. So I actually had my daughter, and I stopped doing fashion. I closed my company, and we were living in a Metropolitan Wharf in Wapping in these big old artist studios there. And one day, I didn't know what I was going to do. I had a young daughter. I remember I was still drawing and making things, and we lived quite sort of an avant-garde lifestyle. And then this photographer came one day to actually use our apartment or our studio as a backdrop for some work he was doing. And he said, "Oh, what are you doing?" And I went, "I don't know, I'm just designing." I think I just had an Anger of Birth range out. I was bashing this sort of metal on the pavements outside Wapping. And I remember it was an idea, and people was like, "Oh," it was quite funny. And anyway, he said, "Well, look, why don't you try styling?" I went, "What styling? I don't know what styling is." And he said, "Well, I've got this young Irish girl, and I'm doing some photos with her somewhere. I can't remember where it was now. would you want to do it? And I went, yeah, okay.
This was Enya.
And it was Enya. It was like she hadn't released anything then. So I did this, and then I remember them saying, oh, she's going to do a video and she wants you to do it. And actually, bizarrely, the company who were making it were in the same building as us. And they said, oh, no, we've got someone else. And I went, well, actually, I think Enya wants me. And Enya did. And so that was it. I started working with the director, Michael Gagan. I went on to do hundreds of promos with him and another couple of directors. And it was really creative. They were like little sketchbooks for films, really. I mean, you'd have a script, you'd have maybe 4 or 5 days to pull it together. And I always tended to do the more theatrical pieces. And it was fantastic. I had my studio, I'd make all the costumes myself, and I had an assistant who'd come and help me. And it was fabulous. And it was something that I could do with a young child. You know, you started, you stopped, and it was done. There was no sort of trying to get paid. There was no thinking about production. That was it. And so for a while, it suited me incredibly well. And I had quite good fun and travelled, a lot of places and met lots of quite interesting people.
Being of the top of the pops kind of era.
Yeah.
I mean, this was Orinoco Flow was number one in the UK. It was number one across Europe.
My first
and
video.
I mean, I can remember seeing. We're going to have a quick shot of the video that you worked on, and it was just one of those. It was one of those sort of songs. It was like the song of the late '80s.
Yeah.
The video was so memorable. Let's just have a quick 30 seconds bit of.
It's so funny because I look going back. That's me holding a piece of string, making it wobble. Like that. And it literally was I just wrapped her in fabric, and I remember putting on some bricks. And she said, for ages later, everyone said, "Oh gosh, you're so much shorter than you look in your video."
It really stood out in a time when there were so many pop videos sort of taking.
It looks
and
like
I think
dated now, but it was quite at the time. It was.
And it was a global hit, and
Yeah.
so your work was number one.
Yes.
So after seeing Boy George,
my first
and
ever George was quite funny.
the New Romantics getting there, your designs were there.
Yeah.
And were you sort of in a studio, and obviously a lot of CGI, well, not CGI, but special effects were added later, etc.
Yeah, I think we probably shot that in the studio. I can't quite remember where it was now, but yeah, we would have. And then I think it was one of the first where all this sort of, it was so much work after the filming, and I think it was quite new at the time.
Yeah,
And Michael was great. Like I said, I did lots of videos with him.
Yeah.
I liked working with 2 or 3. You get to know people, and every now and again I'd do something with someone else, which sometimes was really exciting, but it was so difficult then because, well, not difficult, it was easier in a way because, you'd meet the director in the morning, you'd talk about what he wanted to do, and then you would go, and you wouldn't actually have anyone calling you, actually I've changed mine, or can we do this? Because there was no phone. Yeah. So you'd go back and this is what you asked for, which was a blessing. Now, no one has to make a decision because they can just shift it all the time.
And then you're doing things with Annie Lennox, the wonderful No More I Love You, which is kind of great.
I was actually filming at the same venue last week.
Oh,
it was
really?
really funny. I
Really?
haven't been there for a while, and it's in the lovely old music hall in Cable Street.
Yeah. And again, did you have a sort of a design brief? Did Annie have strong ideas, or did she let you be creative?
She's a very creative person, so we had meetings beforehand to talk about it, and I sort of sketched things, and we had more time on this. Often with those promo things, you literally had like a couple of days to talk, but actually we had meetings beforehand. It was a little bit like a short film, really. And so we had much longer. And she has very clear ideas about what she thinks suits her, and she's right. By that time she was quite established.
Yes.
Enya, that was her first job.
Yes.
And so, as people progress, they have a better understanding. But it was great, and we had all these hand-rolled roses, and I loved having the boys dressed as.
Yeah, No More I Love You, worth having a look on. It's on YouTube.
Yeah.
And then we've got some stills from the Hovis advert, which is, I mean, again, later on tonight or this week, Google the new Hovis advert, because, I mean, in 2 minutes, you go from about 1900 to the modern day. I mean, it's a cast of thousands.
Yeah, it was really tough. I know it's a commercial, everyone goes, oh, it's just a commercial. But we actually had to cover all these periods. And they were whole scenes. And I think, I can't even remember how many, there were so many periods and so many people and extra to dress and to get it right. And it was actually, unfortunately, Ring and Ledwidge, who directed this, has passed away. But he was a brilliant director, and I loved it. And it is like a short film, and I think it really stands up to time now as
Absolutely,
well.
it does. And you have, he kind of goes from the First World War,
Yeah.
watching the suffragettes, right into the
And
bombing,
I love the way his
into the
costume just
60s.
shifts, and
Yes.
it's the same costume,
Yeah,
but it shifts through the ages. So it was again. I think we did it in about 2.5 weeks.
Gosh.
And so, and now actually, so why don't you go and do some commercials sometimes, because they're very well paid. I'm so terrified of them. I don't know how I used to get them together in the time we had. Obviously, on film and TV, you have so much longer to think about and research and discuss, and you have your assistants. Yeah. This is just like running full pelt, trying to get it done all the time.
It really is on an epic scale.
Yeah.
It's a cast of thousands for 2 minutes of.
Yeah, and some didn't even pre-fit. I mean, it's just like people
come
through the door and you're trying to dress them and send them on their way. And towards the end of the day, you haven't got nothing. You have nothing left to fit these people. So it's quite it was a really major actually, but good fun. I liked that one.
I'm going to ask you just about your sort of working process really. How do you work as a designer to say that usually the starting point is usually a script, a screenplay, or maybe even before that a conversation with a director or something? How do you begin?
I mean, it does vary slightly from director to director and project to project, but sometimes you're just offered something, sometimes you interview for it. And usually get sent a script or an element of the script or a story or an overview. I think the first reading, I tend to just read it very quickly and just get an overall visual idea in my head, and then I'll sort of read it through again. I'm notoriously bad at telling my assistant, "Oh, it's great and it won't be too hard," and then I sort of gloss over all the bits that are going to be really difficult. I usually start, depending on researching. I mean, I usually do boards or research boards or mood boards, or I try and think a little bit how I would see it, and then quite quickly I'll speak to the production designer who's usually started before me. My conversation with him, I usually have an initial conversation just to see what is this world, where are these people, where are they placed, and then I'll quite quickly follow that with colours. I usually have my dye come on really early on, and I'll just say, look, I think we should go like greens and pinks or whatever. Just have a sort of range, and we'll dye lots of shades, and then I'll sort of put them together in a way that I see characters or stories. And often this is without knowing the actor, so it's very just vague. But then I'll go and revisit the production design, and we'll talk. And quite often it's rather lovely at that stage, because you go, oh gosh, yes, I was thinking we'd do this green, and well, that would be great. And so you start just getting a visual flow of it. And at this time, I probably spend more time sometimes with the production designer than I do the director, because by that time he's wrecking or he's doing other stuff. And it's this sort of multi-pronged attack. You have to sort of bear in mind what the director's saying, know what the production designer's saying, and then I suppose from that I start sketching.
I think sketching is very. We're going to see some sketches later on, but I think sketching is very important to you, isn't it, in the process?
Yeah, it's it really is my first way in, and I'm not particularly good at sketching, but I enjoy it, and I have my watercolours. It's always watercolours, because I just think you get such beautiful tones, and I'll just start sketching ideas, not sometimes for a character, sometimes just as a sort of overview. I don't know. And I guess if it's historic and there are definite references, I'll probably be slightly closer. But yeah, I'll just do lots of pages of just drawings, and I tend to be very slow. I don't do like reams and reams, because I actually am thinking it. It's so funny. Everyone disturbs you unless you're drawing, and then they leave you alone. So I actually sit there drawing and painting.
Good
and they go,
tip.
She's designing.
Any young designers remember that tip?
It's a very good, and it is a thought process. And I'll usually have a radio on or something as well, because I get a bit overwhelmed if I just think completely. I need a slight distraction, which people think is really odd, but I need that music or something, or a play or something. I'm not really listening to it, so it can be quite trashy, but I just need something else. And so so by the time the actor comes on board, I mean, the drawings I usually have an inkling of who some of them might be, and so then that's the way I'll start speaking with them. It'll be, and I'll show obviously I'll be sending these to the director, and he'll have an influence on this. And if it's a really big show, I'll have an illustrator arrive who can then make the costumes look like they're on the person they're meant to be. My drawings are for the workroom, are for me, and if I get to know a director and they know my work, then my drawings actually are usually fine. They start to understand them. But if for the first time, sometimes directors will say, yes, but what would it look like on him? and so they want someone to do the actual face and and then
Yes.
they want to see it as it will really look.
Yes.
Which I find that quite hard because I think things evolve, and that's why I like to be slightly vague. Because if you go into a fitting and actually, well, this is what you're wearing, it just doesn't work. You have to sort of get there, or you have an actor arrives with ideas, and you have to sort of listen to them and involve them, and I learn a lot sometimes from an actor who's obviously really obsessed about this character. And I have 20, 30 characters thinking, so it's quite nice that they bring things in and you have this lovely, it's my time with them. I love that first few fittings where you're just discovering and you're listening to each other and gaining confidence in some, and showing them colours and working out that your colours actually suit them.
And with your sort of workroom, that
Yeah.
sort of, do you like to work with the same people, your
yeah.
cutters,
Yeah.
your assistants, you've mentioned your dyers already. That's
Yeah.
there's a when we get onto Game of Thrones, it's a huge team of people.
Yeah, I mean, you try to. It's so busy in the industry at the moment. Everyone's freelance. And so I mean, this is what I've just been doing, going from job to job, and in the end you're too exhausted. You have to try and keep your crew. So yes, I do as much as I can. I mean, I love my cutters. But you don't take every cutter to the next job because certain cutters suit certain jobs. You get to know who cuts that very well. And sometimes it's quite nice to throw someone who wouldn't usually do that because you get such an extraordinary item or clothing. If I had someone who only drapes on the stand, period, and I actually made her do a futuristic jacket recently, asked her to, and she moaned a bit. But actually she created something quite phenomenal that no one else would have created.
Yes.
So that I love working with the cutters. I mean, it's the dye room and the cutting room, and it's just where it happens. And also, millinery and printing. It's just like the best feeling when you have all that team there, and it's a collaboration. I can have the starting idea, like I think I'd like to do something like this. I'd like to do it in this colour. But then you should have faith in your cutter to explore. I mean, I know, because I cut, I can say, I don't think that's going to work so well, and I do think that will work. They go, oh, I don't. I said, well, can we try it? So it's this, I don't know, it's so joyful. I really do enjoy working as a team, and I think you get so much out of a team if you give them a sense of their own creativity and their own input. I mean, it's incredible. Who am I to say that I know how best to cut anything, or, I just utilise all these incredible crafts and to create something that I think is good. And that, at the end of the day, is what it's about. I decide what I do like. And so someone might come with a great idea and say, that's my idea. I went, yes, but I choose to use it. So it's this collaboration and collation of ideas that you steer in a way that it creates a visual narrative that hopefully tells the story.
It's a sort of, I always think of it like a huge jigsaw puzzle,
Yeah.
but you don't really know what the finished picture is going to look like.
Exactly.
But there are all these kinds of incredible ingredients
Yeah.
that, well, through you really, in terms of characters and the people that you're bringing together, so much detail. And a question about hair and makeup.
Yeah.
In terms of completing someone's identity for the character that an actor is going to play. That must be a really, obviously, essential because you're providing. How much input do you have, or do you like to use the same people?
It so varies. Well, I don't choose.
Oh, you don't choose?
No, unfortunately, no.
Okay.
There are some who are amazing, and it becomes a real collaboration, and you help each other out, and you create together. There are others who are not quite so helpful, which sometimes it can be so difficult because, as you say, you're creating this character. You need it to work as a whole. So it's a really important part, and it's really important to try and get that conversation and relationship going as early as possible. They usually come on later, and so there's usually a sort of catch up. So usually I'd be like, come and work in our department for a while, come and just see what we're doing. And I mean, there are lovely, lovely, lovely designers around, and that you make something very special, I think, when you work together.
Yes.
It's not a battle.
You very kindly shared some some images. This is your
studio.
this is Michelle's studio.
Oh, look at that award.
With your Emmy sitting there.
I know, you don't know where to put them, it's funny.
And again, it's about sort of what sort of feeds into your imagination and your sort of creativity. And
I think I'm quite eclectic. I just sort of so it's nice having all your books around, and it's something I might have made 10 years ago. Somewhere, oh God, yeah, that was a really interesting process. So I think I have a really rubbish memory, so I try and have everything around me so I can be inspired. I mean, I'm inspired all the time. I can go for a walk and I just see someone in the street, or I can see a bird, or I can see a leaf, or whatever, and I think it just feeds into your imagination.
This feels very creative to me. I mean, I can visualize stepping into that,
and it's also like my history. That's me things. I've made or parts of things.
Fantastic.
And, it's like being Westwood shoes, which I could never walk in.
But might come in useful one day.
I know, but that's why I keep everything. That's why I'm so cluttered.
We've got
that's my office. I remember taking David Benioff, who was the one of the showrunners on Game of Thrones, when he first offered me the job. He's about 6'5", and I think the door is about 5. Oh. I think he was already a bit. He was a bit. I don't know what he thought of me, but I took him in there, and I just remember him being really uncomfortable and just thinking, "Who is this woman?"
Well, he obviously got something from this kind of environment. So. It brings me to the Devil's. It's called the Devil's Whore in some territories, and the Devil's Mistress in some territories.
They did very badly in the States because they can't bear the word whore.
Right. So they changed it. It's 17th century. It was really, really widely acclaimed.
Yeah.
So what inspired you? Where did you look at other films set in this period? Did you look at portraits? What was the inspiration?
I mostly looked at portraits. I mean, at this time, I was sort of still really finding my way into film and TV. I was very late coming to it because I had a child, but I didn't know quite how to get into it and if I could. And so this opportunity arose, and it was to do, I thought, this really lovely 4-piece series, and it was period, and I quite liked to have doing something period, and so early and so different, and I felt there was a real chance to be quite to be true to the fashion, but to the fashion of the time, the costume of the time, but to actually be really expressive with it, which hopefully we did with her, because she was such an amazing person to work with. But the thing is, it was in South Africa, and so I had to go there with my trusty assistant Alex, and I think we were the only two that went, and we literally made it in a tent with people who had John from Cosprop made a couple of the key pieces with me for her, but other than that, and maybe he made one of the others, but we made almost everything a tent with cutters that had never cut period.
Gosh. And
it was so tough. I think on the first day there was a forest fire and the tent blew away with all our costumes in. It was just like one of those films that I felt so ill by the time. And every morning we had to drive dark over a mountain range, sometimes in thick fog, to get to the studio. It was like, I can't tell you, the hardest thing we've ever done. But actually, the actors were great, and the director was, fortunately, a friend of mine. And somehow we pulled this together, and I don't think any of us have ever quite worked so hard. But then we were so pleased with the way it came out.
Yeah,
and the way
it was really, really widely acclaimed. It was a big
success. And it was just this lovely...
Internationally, it was a big success.
Yeah, and this powerful use of colour, and this idea that people, yes, these were the costumes of the time, but that we always look at paintings and people are very fixed and very posed. And it was the idea, how do you move in these? How do you run in these? How do you wear them when you're feeling bereft? How let's bring some emotion and something else, another aspect to it. And because there was a sort of slightly fanciful sort of element to it, we could actually make wonderful odd wings and children could run around. And, it was with animal masks on it. It was a really lovely piece to do, but it was really tough. I think it was like 4 or 5 months in South Africa.
That's a long time, yeah.
And we had, really sweet women, but they really they didn't know how to make this. So we literally...
So you were there...
We were teaching them, and we were cutting things.
You were teaching them.
I was doing the men's, and Alex was doing the women's, and Alex was doing the men's, and just trying to pull it together.
Yes, yeah.
So it was a real baptism of fire into the industry, I think.
Gosh. When it comes to something like Sense and Sensibility, it's that sort of BBC classic Sunday night kind of drama. Are the stakes higher? Is there more pressure?
I think anything you do that's Jane Austen, because people are so passionate about her, I mean, you open yourself up to criticism, frankly, if you try and do anything. We did this, I mean, I look at it now and it sort of seems quite naive to me. I would do it very differently now, but again, it was one of my first shows. And I worked with John from Cosprof, and we created a lot of the costumes together. And I thought it was very pretty. We wanted, again, this sense of colour and joy.
Did you look at other versions?
I did. Well,
is that always a temptation, or yeah?
No, I think if you're doing Austen, you have to an extent. And I remember seeing a couple, and I know I really didn't want them to be like that. I wanted to. I remember going through all the racks at because it was quite low budget, going through the racks at Cosprof and just going, this is so dreary, so dreary. I wanted to inject more into it, so that it was lovely that we got to make a few pieces. It's hard. I mean, you want to be true to the period, and I try to be true to the period, but I still believe there's it's a drama, it's not a documentary. I want to be able to tell the story with colour and with a passion and with a beauty, if that's what's needed. And so I err on the side of that rather than being completely and utterly
recreating.
Because what's the truth?
Yeah,
I mean, I just
40, whatever it is.
He was there.
Yes, yeah. So which very brilliantly brings me on to, so what is more challenging? Quiz of the week. Is it a period show, a period costume drama like Sense and Sensibility, or it's something like Love and Other Disasters,
That
which is
was
set
most challenging film I
today?
ever made in my life. And I just think generally contemporary is much harder. It's so hard when you do contemporary because everyone has an opinion of how they see contemporary, and the actors have what they think looks best on them. And actually...
It's interesting how that changes, isn't it? From
it
what
is.
an actor might accept for Austen's will to this.
Exactly, because they see too much of themselves, and therefore it's much harder for them to let go in some ways, and they have inhibitions about their body or this, and so it makes it really tough. And also a lot of the time, the director always goes, "Well, just go and buy it," which is just the worst thing to do. I hate shopping. I want to create things,
Yeah.
So that I think, I don't like doing contemporary unless there's a really great story and something really gritty and that you can really have a control over the palette and do something quite interesting and subversive, or you can tell something. You can. There's a way of designing it that is not about being contemporary fashion, I guess. I don't know, but this was particularly hard, I have to say.
It seems that
particularly unrewarding.
it seems that most designers say really the same thing. That everyone for contemporary, everyone has opinion from the director. Everyone.
Yeah.
But
I just decided to go and buy it. It's just like it's so horrible.
Yes.
There must be a black suit out there. It's like, well, there probably is. But
Yes. So I think it's a challenging one. I think for designers.
I think, I'm full of admiration for people who do it often. But it's not for me. I love a workroom. I want to create things. That's the joy of design for me. It's like coming up with right from scratch, from the colours to the fabrics to the drawings to the finished finished costume that becomes that character.
Yes.
So, that's my interest really. I think.
Right. So, Game of Thrones. When the story of the teens is told, this is really the show of the century, of the 21st century. It was such a kind of had such global impact on everything. Even the expression "winter is coming." You kind of, even if somebody hadn't seen it, they kind of knew what it was referring to. Yeah. It was an extraordinary series. So I think we're going to have a quick clip. This is actually from series 3. So I guess things are being established.
Yeah, I haven't
and then we're going to kind of go back to the beginning of how this all began. Right.
It's been a long time, my old friend.
Death is coming for everyone and everything. A darkness that will swallow the dawn.
But the night is dark and full of terror.
You're not half as clever as you think you are.
Still makes me more clever than you.
Show them how it feels to lose what they love.
I'm going to light the biggest fire the North has ever seen.
Everyone is mine to torment.
There's a beast in every man, and it stirs when you put a sword in his hand. I want to fight for the side that fights for the living. Did I come to the right place?
Right, there you go. To go back to the beginning of all that, how did you become involved with Game of Thrones?
I became involved through Gemma Jackson, the production designer, and Mark Huffin, who was the first producer. And I think, I can't remember how I knew Gemma, but Gemma's very good at bringing in new talent. And so she likes the idea of trying to work with someone new. And I, at the time, was really pretty inexperienced still. And I desperately wanted to get more into film. And I remember I had been to LA and I'd bought this book, and I think it's Ode Nerdrum. And I remember bringing it back in hand luggage. It was really heavy. And Gemma asked me around for lunch just to talk through and say, look, there is this project coming. I'd quite like to recommend you, blah, blah, blah. What do you think? And I took this book along and said, well, I was thinking about it. I said, I think it should be about the loneliness, and we should go back to how it really was, not this fantasy costume all the time. And fantasy costume, I think before, or not all of it, but some of it, it wasn't thought through. It's like some there'd be a woman arrive in a silk dress riding a horse in a winter wood. Why? So I really liked this idea of treating it seriously. Like, so what did these people go through? What were their lives like? So I had this conversation, then I had to do some mood boards and everything to meet David and Dan at the hotel just around the corner. I remember going with this huge portfolio, and they all sat down and produced and everything. I started, after about, I think, half an hour, they're going, well, it's very nice. But I haven't finished yet. And I kept showing, because I was so desperate at this job, like showing them more and more. And then the director was there. And they said, look, we really have to go. I went, oh, okay then. Anyway, they called up and said, can you come back this afternoon and show us the rest? So they obviously, I thought, oh, well, I'm slightly interested. I know they were looking at a lot of other designers, a lot of them more experienced than me. So I was just thinking, oh, God, this is going to be so awful. And then the director said he wanted to use someone he'd worked with before in the States. And then finally I got a call saying, actually, no, we'd really like to go with you. I remember being elated for about 5 minutes and then terrified. Because I think, well, how am I going to do this? And it was in Belfast as well. And no one wanted to come with me to Belfast. And my usual assistant, Alex Forden, was on a film in France. And he said, I don't want to do fantasy. And it's going to be really period as well. Trying to make him come over. Anyway, so I did it with a group of people I hadn't worked with before, and we did the pilot. And it was like a baptism of fire. I hadn't ever designed armour before, and so I had a very lovely armourer who came and took it. So
we could talk a bit about the armour, because we've got some wonderful slides.
Yeah.
I was just saying, it launched the careers of so many people at the same time.
And some of them had never acted before. The young girls.
Did you read the books? Did you go to the source material?
I did to start with.
Yeah.
And then after about, I think one of them, the showrunners have said, look, it's fine to read the books, but actually that's not where we want to particularly. We want our own version of it, because there's lots of references to boiled leather and bright colours, and they're saying that we don't actually want to do that.
Yes, okay.
I love, okay. I mean, some of these were my referencing for... I did a lot of period referencing and across the world, really wide. I mean, try to look at things, costumes for different climates.
Your research process, which you've shared, is just phenomenal. I mean, it absolutely is extraordinary.
It had
you bring
to be
that extraordinary depth
to make it work.
I mean, these are just some of your, again, kind of moments from things that you've
King's Landing, I think,
sort of collected over time.
Yeah.
To kind of begin to sort of build that world, sort of patterns. Is this what you were showing to the producers? This
This was late. I mean,
this
yes,
was
to
later.
some extent, but it was just the idea that in a city you would have a street of armour, so there'd be competition, so armour would develop and colour would develop, and whereas in the far north, if you're in a small place like King's Landing, you probably had one armourer who handed it from father to son. They would weave their own fabrics, so the looms would be quite narrow, so let's have panels, and how would they dye their clothes? And so it was trying to go really back into how did these people exist, and the same for here. And I actually ended up I ended up Simon, who created this piece of armour for the first or second season, wasn't available for the third. And actually I started working with some Italian armourers because to me this was too machine made. I mean, it was a very beautiful piece, but I wanted something much more organic and I couldn't get it.
Right,
and so the Italian armourer suddenly understood that, and we actually made lots of leather pieces, and it was much more handmade and I don't know. For me, it worked better. I mean, we actually created this.
Gosh,
this is just the drawing, but it actually fitted onto it. It was hand beaten.
Yes,
and we took a mould and we beat. And it was a really, really long process. They say it can't be done. I went, yes, it can. It had a little door here.
How long for series 1? How long was your preparation time?
I know for the pilot it was about 10 weeks, which was crazy.
10 weeks?
Yeah, and I think for the series 1 it was probably about 14 weeks.
I mean, if anyone hasn't, it's a huge cast.
Yeah.
I mean, it's mammoth, isn't it? I mean,
it's funny
your
because
cast of characters is ginormous.
It is, and because often you shoot out of sequence, so you might, and you have 3 or 4 different directors, and so they do it in groups. So you tend to design with the showrunners on something like this, and maybe there's one director who's the head director. But so when directors come in for their episode, I mean, you're still filming one, and then the next ones are coming in, and their team, and you're having to have conversations about where that character is going, and then how the costumes will be, because each director can't change the costume.
No.
Because it would just become really disjointed. So you have to have this sort of overview. They can say, I want 10 of them because it's a big fight. Okay, we can do that. And it's nice to know that in advance, so it's not too difficult. You're running a workstream throughout filming as well, so you have to be on set for new costumes, but then you also have to be back at base for your new fittings, and it just becomes this sort of circular sort of motion of sometimes just not knowing where to be. And often they shoot 2 units. So there's
two things going on.
Two different things going on at the same time, and one of
gosh.
them might be overseas. So you like this. It sounds like it. I mean, the first year, I just remember thinking, this is just. My head was going to explode. I mean, Russell, my partner, will tell you. I remember looking at him and saying, "Why are people giving you presents?" He went, "It's because it's my birthday," and I hadn't even managed to fathom. I was just so somewhere else. But then I think by the 3rd series, you have to learn to delegate. And I think I learned that quite quickly on the first one, because I used to love doing everything myself, like this and this. Yeah. Suddenly you do need 2 or 3 assistants, and you do have to trust them, and you do need a team of that. And so you tend to become, it's much more purely about design and an overview. It's the only way you can get through. And of course I check all the costumes, and I'll do a fitting for the extras, and then the whole team will descend and do others, but then I'll check them at the end of each day to see if they're in the right direction still.
And you had your trusted team with you.
I built a team there.
You built a team.
Because they just didn't, no one really wanted to go there. And they did have people, but they're not particularly experienced. But over the time, they became great. And I've actually had quite a few people from Scotland come over, which was great. And I still work with undercutters now. But we'd pull a rail together of colours. This was in Angels, I think, just to get an idea of where we should go. These are really quite early on, these reference boards. But yeah, just...
This other shots of kind of incredible kind of research.
Yeah, I love the sort of Italian...
And for the detail.
To me, this was so great for King's Landing to show how competitive it became, how decorative, how amazing compared to the Starks.
Yeah, you had these different kind of cultures existing in this kind of one world. Really, that was kind of.
And actually, one of the producers actually had a written. Frank Dolger was very great. He said, "Look, you're terrified, I know, but if you just look." Have an overview. I love some of the Japanese. We use quite a lot of this actually. Just look at the whole story. Mark out where, even if we don't get there for 3 or 4 seasons, just in your head have a vague idea of what you want to do there. and just keep that there, because if you don't, by the time you get there, you'll have used all your ideas up here. He said, just focus
really
in on
interesting.
the
Gosh.
climate, what they're doing, what they're about, and a colour palette. The show does jump around quite a lot, so you have to visually know where you are quite quickly. So that was the idea.
And did you have a sense, because if you've experienced it, you know that sometimes people aren't around for very long.
Yes.
Did you have a sense of one, it was going to be 8 seasons,
No.
and who would survive?
I know, absolutely not. I had no
Gosh.
idea at all.
Right.
I think the fact that they killed Ned Stark at the end of one was probably the cleverest thing they did, because it got everyone's attention, because obviously he was the male lead.
Yeah.
But also, they were very, very smart, because
Yeah.
he was the most well-known actor.
Yes.
Who probably cost the most money.
Ah.
Later on, they paid them a lot. But to start with,
Okay.
I think by using a lot of newcomers, I think it kept the budget relatively small early on in the way at the wages. But actually, they did put money into, especially actually the second season, when they realised again, second and third, and they didn't ever cut our budget, which was great, because often that happens on shows. So every year we amassed more costumes for various, so it meant that we had more to spend on the principals. So it was strange. We built up so much stock in the end that we very rarely, we hired less and less.
I guess it must have been hard to think, I'm not going to get connected to this character because they may not be around for very long.
I loved Michelle Fairley. I was so sad when they killed her. She's such a wonderful woman. She was so great around.
We've just got some.
But just looking at the way these pieces were made and the colours, and I was trying to sort of create something new by blending different designs. And these are really
What
early
amazing
designs,
sketches
yeah.
of yours, some fantastic sketches.
Now, these were far too Japanese. This is
Okay.
what I found. You'd start off being very much one look, and then slowly I'd try and blend it so that it became something else, so it wasn't so instantly recognisable. So, but this is what I say with my drawings. I'd just draw like this until I get somewhere where I think, oh, actually, it's getting closer.
Because Game of Thrones, again, if you don't know it, it's in a sort of fantasy, sort of medieval world. But what I think is, the brilliance of your work is that costume has to anchor the audience.
Yeah.
And again, just seeing the range of your research material, that comes out of the screen. Those characters are absolutely, you know who they are.
Yeah.
Instantly, even before they've spoken a word, you kind of know what they are, and the costumes really, really do that. Even if you're not sure, we're in a forest, or is it medieval? Where actually are we? The costumes do the work.
But I also think the breakdown was key to it, because before, I think I always used to really annoy me when costumes are too clean. They had no life. Whereas these were, we had a whole aging department whose sole purpose was, make this costume look like it belongs to that person and has led that life. And I think that was a really key element to the whole show. So you can have a beautiful dress that's finished, but it's not finished until it's spent a week being made to look like it belongs to the person who's wearing
people
it.
really lived in those,
Exactly.
or even slept in those clothes.
Exactly. So I want to smell the costumes, I used to say, and you have to.
You do. That's what's so absolutely brilliant about the design of Game of Thrones. Some more helmets. This again. And this is a really extraordinary piece. Really, really extraordinary.
It's also thinking, well, what do people do? In the evenings, in the far north, they probably embroider about, and so then they tell their stories through their embroidery or through colour, and there's all this sort of the sigils and whatever. It was a lot.
On the sort of subject of things like sort of armour, of course, the actors have to be able to get onto horses, fight, move, walk. They have to do all that. It's not, it's so fast moving. The actors are always doing something, and they have to do that in those clothes that you've created.
If armour fits properly, you can wear metal and leather armour. Probably not for fights. We usually did soft or moulds for fighting. But on the whole, if armour, if anything fits properly, it's not an issue. There's no point creating an armour for someone who then can't get on a horse, because that whole armour doesn't make sense. Yes. So it's like they have to be able to do what they need to do in that armour. For safety, yes, okay, then don't really want to be killed, so they have to. Then we'll put them into softs. and just put them in. It's either plastic or often we do it in leather actually, and paint leather to look like metal. But a lot of actors quite like the weight. It gives them the sense of character, I think. If you put someone just lightweight plastic armour, they'd have no... It doesn't give them anything. I mean, they then have to act like it's heavy.
So it really helps the actors as well. It informs who they're playing.
I think so. I think that's true. Very true.
This was an extraordinarily beautiful.
Yeah, his was very fun because we designed this and say it's the only armour that actually has to be completely clean because he didn't ever do anything.
No,
it's fresh out the box. It was never used.
So that has to tell its own story, doesn't
it?
Yeah.
Well, that's it. Costumes always tell its story.
You're sort of working.
You're pretending to be doing something.
We've got some just some detail, but I think we've got some some brilliant sketches.
Yeah, this is sort of how this just on the stand, sort of just working out the way, the lines, and how we would create this costume. And again, these coats were quite heavy, but we always mounted them onto a corset, so it was held very firmly here, so it enabled her to do all the movements. And a lot of her jewellery, I went on to create a company, and we've made quite a lot of, taken her jewellery into fashion, because actually a lot of these costumes did influence fashion. And so it was quite nice to do our own little jewellery line.
Yeah, this is just kind of showing how it's sort of built. You're sort of building that.
Yeah.
Building that up.
It was very painstaking. I mean, a lot of it was hand-made, hand-finished, hand-cut. We used to have a little mezzanine floor where all these costumes were made, and all the giants there as well. We always laughed that Linnea, who made the giants, was the smallest of the team. She was tiny, but so clever. And then this is the incredible work by Gianpaolo Grassi, who was my armourer. Really a phenomenal work, and I love him so much because he's so organic, and he can just... It's almost like his metalwork is almost like drawing, and anything I can ask or say, he finds a way to create it.
There's a kind of incredible sort of softness to it, even though it's metal.
Yeah, and incredibly comfortable to wear. This again, this development of the final dress, the whole season. So it was thinking like, what does this dress have to say? And it's combination of the Tullys and of the Starks and of her moments of being, finding herself and the circle. I mean, it's just like there's so many different things I wanted to put into that final dress as like the culmination of this, and like the dyewood leaves falling at her feet, and the print, the pattern, the fabric was from Marjorie's wedding dress because they actually did have this bond. So I mean, it sounds so silly, but to me, it all has to make sense. So I don't want anything to be there just because that looks right or that looks good. I want it to have a reason for absolutely everything that costume had to say.
Did you have a sense it would have this kind of incredible momentum, or hard to say? Hard question, I suppose.
I think
one
so.
never knows.
Yeah, I mean, I think you realise probably third or fourth season it was going somewhere. I have to say, when they asked me to do the new one, I read the first page and went, I can't. My time's done. It was wonderful and amazing, and I learnt so much, but I don't want to do any more.
In this sort of current era of high definition televisions, most people have 50-inch screens. We're now in the era of Blu-ray.
Yeah.
Does that absolutely sort of heighten detail in a good way, or it means that people see everything now, every strand of hair, every earring?
I think they do. They do see everything. I remember being in a hotel in LA and looking out the window, and literally this man's TV screen was the size of his wall. I'm just thinking, oh my gosh, they'll see everything. But I think in some ways that it's great because you can actually, in the details, you can say so much. And for me, it's quite exciting, which means we do make everything properly. It's not like in the lovely old BBC days where a bit of cardboard with some gold paint with a brooch. Yes. And it works because film, it worked and it was great. And it's so funny to go back and look at costumes, especially in Costume House, where you go, I love that show, and that was the costume. And it's like, it's so, it works so well for its time. But now every single detail, I mean, down to the minutest.
It's very heightened, isn't it?
There.
Visually heightened.
Yeah,
now.
and so in some ways that's lovely, and it really removes even further from theatre, I think.
Yes.
And I did some dance pieces, and suddenly I had to, oh my gosh, the scale is so different, and I found it quite exciting actually to do it, to stand back and to see what worked. I'm just fascinated by anything all
yeah.
design really.
Oh, is that part of your jewellery?
That was just just a maquette to try and work out how I wanted the final crown to be.
yes,
But sometimes when I work with jewellery designers, I'll draw it and then they'll 3D it and we'll work out how it actually really looks.
Yeah. In terms of the legacy of the show, you worked on this, absolutely stunning book. I mean, again, it says so much about your brilliant work that this fabulous book is put together, and people are so fascinated. You've got the whole cosplay, all of that, and then you've also got the experience, the Game of Thrones experience in Northern Ireland.
Yeah, I went there actually. It's really great. I was really impressed.
Were you involved in the selection?
Yes, it's great because we have there's this wonderful. Actually, two of the girls who worked with me throughout the eight seasons now look after the costumes full time there, and actually they're starting to look after other films' costumes. They've built this huge facility, so we have everything there.
Yes.
So and they care for them and they they redress them and they put the grime back on and they just constantly look after it. And so they've built this amazing facility with original sets. I mean, it's as similar as the Harry Potter. I think it's the same people who did it. Attention to detail is amazing. So I think they will start doing some sort of workshops and pieces like that there. So, but it's really.
I'm assuming this is just a fraction of the of the.
It's really hard to choose.
Yeah.
But it's lovely that they're cared for because so often on productions, you have all these lovely costumes. You really care. They become characters almost.
Yeah. Yes.
And they just get boxed up and not seen. I used to love it going to Angels when you used to open a suit and there'd be the actor's name.
Yes.
I'd love it if costumes could have all the actors' names in that had ever worn it.
Yeah.
Because the history is so fascinating, but less and less.
Yes. Mid this epic fantasy world, you go and into this other extraordinary world in the world of The Crown. Yeah. So we're just going to have a quick snippet of season 1.
It would help if we could decide here and now on your name.
My name?
Yes, ma'am. Your regnal name. That is the name you will take as queen.
Let's not overcomplicate matters unnecessarily. My name is Elizabeth.
And long live Queen Elizabeth.
Don't you get sick of it all? And lonely?
I do. Which is why it's so important to have the right person by your side.
You understand, the titles, they're not the job. She is the job. Loving her, protecting her. She is the essence of your duty.
We have a new sovereign, young and a woman.
I'll escort her down from there.
No, sir. If you don't mind, the Crown takes precedence.
You don't think I would have preferred to grow up out of the spotlight? Away from the scrutiny and the visibility?
Be firm, just lay down the law. I know he's Winston Churchill and all that, but remember who you are. You're
Nobody.
The Queen of England.
This new Elizabethan age comes at a time when mankind stands on the edge of catastrophe.
You my wife or my queen?
I am both, and a strong man will be able to kneel to both.
I will not kneel before my wife.
Your wife is not asking you to.
But my queen commands me.
Yes.
I beg you make an exception for me.
No.
What kind of marriage is this? What kind of family?
I need to speak to my sister. Now!
I am aware that I'm surrounded by people who feel that they could do the job better. Strong people with powerful characters. But for better or worse, the crown has landed on my head.
I have seen 3 great monarchies brought down through their failure to separate personal indulgences from duty. You must not allow yourself to make similar mistakes. The crown must win. Must always win.
The Crown must win. Very apt for this week.
Yes, it is.
What's happening?
We're so online.
So, gosh, so the world, that rather brutal world of Game of Thrones to this? Was it sort of relief? A different world, but another very heavily scrutinised world.
It was funny because Stephen Daldry called me when I was actually in Belfast still and said, "Oh, would you come and do this with me?" And I'd never met him, but I think a friend of mine recommended me. And actually, I'd got to the stage with Game of Thrones where I felt I had designed all the areas, and I was tired of it. Really, I'd lost. I just wanted a break from it. So I left amicably, which was important. I felt, which was difficult.
You did go back.
Yeah, I mean. A couple of people left not so amicably, and there wasn't a way back. But although they didn't, I sort of wanted to leave it in the hands of someone they didn't want me to, and I went, "Look, it's your choice." And at the end of the day, but let's keep in touch. And so then I actually went to Azerbaijan and did a film with Asif Kapadia called Alienino. So I had meetings for this. I can't remember, maybe in the sort of September. And I remember talking to the production designer who was aboard and Stephen, and this was way before it was going to start, probably 4 or 5 months before it was going to start. And we just talked about the scale of the rooms and how Buckingham House was sort of decaying slightly. But there are these beautiful costumes within it, but the scale of it, and also again talking a little bit about. We all think we know the royal family, we know the private life that they want us to know, but then there's the private, and it was much more private then, because obviously we don't have all the things we have now. But the only way we could possibly be believed is that if we did the others really so well that if the wedding was exactly like the wedding and the coronation, then you might believe the story that Peter wanted to say was behind the scenes. So I sort of thought about this and thought, that's great, okay, fine. And then I went off and did Alienino, which was a really crazy job in Azerbaijan, and got back late as well because we overran on shooting, and just went straight into The Crown. And so it was the first, again, whenever you start a series, it's the hardest because no one ever realises quite how big it's going to be. And no one ever wants to spend the money on the first series, or they didn't at that time. So it was very tight. I had an incredibly small workroom. I think I had about 3 or 4 cutters and 3 or 4 makers, which by comparison to Game of Thrones was tiny. And so we had to use a lot of outworkers at times. And it was insane. We didn't really have enough space. But we just threw ourselves at it. Sometimes when you fit, you usually have maybe 20 dresses to fit 10 people. So we would have like 10 dresses to fit 10 people. Like they had to work, and they were all period. So, and then we also were filming in South Africa again. And whilst we were filming in South Africa, I got a call from Game of Thrones saying, "Would you consider coming back for the last 2 episodes of this?" And I went, "Oh gosh!" And because I I don't know. So I asked the producer of The Crown. He said, "If you don't ask me, I can't say no." So okay. So I remember designing Cersei's crown with the lions in Africa, and someone said, "What are you doing?" I went, "Drawing wildlife." So yeah, I had to then put a team together to finish the season 6, I think, of Game of Thrones, but really still focusing on this.
Yes,
so it was, and it was so hard because they sort of asked me to go back on the set, and I don't know why I didn't. In some ways I regret it, but it was such a tough job, and it was out at Elstree, and I thought, I didn't know if they'd ever allow it to grow into the job it needed to be. It was such a battle at times to get what we want. Like, you need it to be this good. You need to have these things made. And Stephen understood it, but sometimes there was a bit of a reluctance from production. "Oh no, you can do it for less." Like, no, we can't, because if you want it to be of a standard that it should be, to be taken seriously, to then give the message you want, then you have to put the money in. Then they did. Later on, I think they did. And it's gone on to be brilliant. But it was a real battle. It was very tough. And I then went back to Game of Thrones for 2 years.
And yet The Crown became, probably the second most talked about series of the century after Game of Thrones.
But then I didn't want to get pulled into another series because I'm getting on a bit. And I would actually, like Game of Thrones, although I did design films while I was doing it, because only 6 months a year, I want to do a lot of different things. I quite like variety. I quite like different challenges.
Yes.
And to get pulled into that for another 6 years, I chose not to. And also, there was, and there still is, this real sort of snobism towards TV. And because I do design films, but I have done a lot of big series, it is quite still looked down on. Or I don't think it is so much now. Finally, there's a sort of crossover.
I think Game of Thrones changed that. I think
it
I
did
think
to
it
some
absolutely
extent.
elevated the series to
Yeah.
kind of what it's sort of become today. I think.
I remember one designer saying to someone who was working with me, "Why do you want to work on cheap TV?" And I think Game of Thrones is not cheap TV. It's quite hard. It's quite...
No.
So it was funny, but there was that attitude, and I
Yeah.
suppose, and sometimes I felt quite hurt by it. So actually, I just don't want to get drawn into another series. I'd like to try and do more film work, and also film work's shorter, and you actually get more variety, which I think is quite.
Yeah.
For me now, I mean, if I were 40, then I'd maybe so, but I'm not. So I just want to do a few more different eras. I love doing. I love doing fantasy, I like doing period as well. So just more variety.
Yeah. You again shared some of your kind of wonderful sketches, sketching for the Queen and that sort of realised, and then the different characters, Princess Margaret, of course. And you really sort of create those kind of differences.
And I didn't have an illustrator on this, actually, so I was just... Stephen actually very sweetly liked my drawings.
And then Wallace Simpson.
I loved this dress we designed for her. She was so... Leah Williams, she was so amazing. Yeah. She so becomes her character. I love her doing.
Yeah. And again, the period clothing must have really helped them, shoes, all of that. And then the wedding dress.
Yeah, I know. It was as close as we could possibly make it. But even then, because I think Elizabeth, as a young woman, I mean, she was a goddess. She was the height of fashion. And when we look at that dress now, it looks slightly frumpy. And I think it's really important in a drama to show, to just shift it very slightly in fit, to make her look to the audience now that she does look incredibly beautiful. Because I think if it doesn't look to their eye, I don't know. Anyway, so I'm a great believer in just shifting it slightly. So the fit was just a little bit different around her, and she's a different shape, of course, anyway. But I just thought, I mean, the bridesmaid dresses were again pretty exact copies, but I just put I think 3 tulle layers down. I put a peach, just so that it would glow slightly more. They're just really fun, little tiny things. I don't know. And we actually, with this, because again, the budget, we started with all the hand embroidery at the top, and then we printed the bottom. But we printed it knowing that if we actually ran out of time and money, we'd start it. But actually, we did end up beating it all. But it was literally like that sometimes. Like let's print it so we know that it's there, and let's see how close we got. And I think some of that was machined, but all the top part was handmade. And then we had the train. We had people from the embroidery school, and we just laid out the train, and they would just sit to either side working on it and just rolling it as they went, and they did it in shifts. It was incredible. People worked so incredibly hard on this.
Gosh. And again, a lot of period things to kind of create. That's a sort of something that was recreated from the actual.
Well, sometimes they did think that they might use original footage, so we sometimes had to create absolutely the costumes so that we could use it, and sometimes they wouldn't.
We've talked about sort of the public and private Elizabeth, and how you captured that.
To me, this is so her, and I love the colours in that. I don't know if they show too much, but it was an idea of with this lovely soft tartan, and it reflected the sort of hills and the colour and the head. So there was something like, this is the woman I felt she would have wanted to be. I mean, just unnoticed.
Okay.
With her horse,
doing her own thing.
Yeah, whereas Margaret, I sense, in a headscarf, in a similar coat, but so different. And that was the joy, actually, sometimes dressing them in almost identical outfits, but showing how differently they were worn. And I remember hearing that, or reading that Elizabeth would have maybe 2 fittings for her costume. But Margaret would always have 2 or 3 and walk them to see how they felt. And so it was this lovely idea of, they're both Macs, but they're both worn in such completely contrasting ways. And again, this is, I think, it's a dinner party.
Yeah.
And,
again,
how different.
Yeah, how different they are.
And there's a sweetness to it as well. I like her use of jewellery and messaging. Again, there's this lovely thing with messaging, as I tried to say in Game of Thrones. Elizabeth uses her jewellery a lot to just give out different
messages and
comments.
And here's you with your debutantes.
At the ICA, back at the ICA, all those years after I used to work there. This is where we shot it.
Right.
We did a little thing there.
Into a darker, very taut gaslighting film. Before I Go to Sleep, Nicole Kidman, Colin Firth, and Mark Strong.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very, very tense throughout.
Yeah.
But you said something very interesting to me about her character and her costume.
I mean, this is a contemporary piece, obviously.
Yeah, and a contemporary
but
film.
I like
yeah.
working with Nicole, and
Yeah.
I liked this idea of how of a woman being dressed by a man, a jealous man who doesn't want her to be attractive. So there was this lovely, slightly oversized, slightly odd. I don't think it is instantly obvious, but then you see whenever she's within the company of others, she just looks odd, like she hasn't been put together properly.
She looks out of place.
Yeah.
And that comes from the costume design.
Yeah, and
she really does.
We worked on it quite hard together, just sort of trying to find that, so that it's just this, it's something uncomfortable about her. And then, but then obviously when she's within his area, then there's something quite sexual about the way he dresses her. So it was interesting. It was a really, I say I like films like this when there's a really quite taut, sort of clear idea that this isn't someone who just, I don't know, it's not a normal life. It's something quite precise and quite stylized. I just remember Tilda Swinton in I Am Love. I loved her costumes in that. Yeah. Again, it was contemporary, but there was just a clarity and a beauty of colour. I think colour plate was really important in this.
And then you collaborated with Nicole again in Queen of the Desert, playing Gertrude Bell.
That was an adventure. I mean, it was a crazy film, but I just wanted to work with Werner because his Aguirre Wrath of God was my inspiration for a lot of the breakdown on Game of Thrones. So it was lovely.
Yeah, finally.
And I'm really friendly with his wife now. She's an amazing photographer and filmmaker. Yeah. But yes, it was great. It was meant to be one costume throughout, but of course it never was.
Yeah. And then the lovely, really lovely, gentle. I mean, after that brutal world of Game of Thrones, it must have been such a joy to kind of go to Julie Walters and a lovely children's film.
I know, and we just literally toured the gardens, the beautiful gardens of the UK, and it was that delicious summer, and I think it only rained once, and that's the day we needed it to rain. It rained. Other than that, it didn't.
Oh, wonderful.
It was the moment when Colin loses his mind, and
Oh,
it rained that day.
Oh, perfect then.
But it was again. We handmade all these costumes. I love this idea actually that I wanted it to be in camera. I'm so fed up of everything being post. So we actually designed this print, and then we painted in. So the costumes are supposed to grow as she moved through the garden, and then we made these animatronic butterflies as well, out of embroidered butterflies, which worked well on the studio. But actually the camera signal interrupted them, and they were flapping really slowly on set. It was really fun. Anyway, but and so it was just such a joy to do this. I loved it so much. It was so, so hands-on. Again, a small team, dyer, embroiderer, printer, and we were all in the same room. And I think I painted the yellow bits and the butterflies, and it was just glorious and just this idyllic summer. So all the clothes were supposed. So as she sort of moves in the garden, they were meant to envelop her and I guess give her the love that she'd never had from her parents, and to try and heal her. And it was just this sort of lovely journey for these sort of three damaged children. And even I think his father's shirts he wore sort of started sprouting into grass, and it's all lost. So this is sort of how I do my little drawings. He starts here, and he's quite feral.
Yes.
The feathers in his balaclava, and then slowly his shirt starts sprouting, and he opens up and he responds to it. And here's the beautiful embroidery going from Michele
She gets
Clapton.
the moss on her and the
she
ivy.
Rolls. I mean, I just think her work is extraordinary.
It's magical.
Yeah,
it's
and we found this lovely little box in Paris, I think. Oh. It's a little cardboard box, but then we needed 5 of them, so we had to...
Yeah, it's a magical film.
I really enjoyed it.
Yes, yeah.
I really did enjoy doing it.
Oh, and then there's this beautiful...
we were working
the two sisters who... You sort of see them as ghosts, so don't you?
Yes, you hardly see them, but we made all these dresses, and I liked the idea because it's all about her death as well. So actually, the leaves the other way, but we printed the leaves falling down the bottom and then ombre'd them from spring to autumn, and then you see her sitting in the garden.
Yeah.
I mean, look, no one sees this stuff, but it makes me happy that it's there. And again, this is really lovely embroidery, but this is sort of how we worked it out, and we placed it, and then. And I love it. Was also based on nature. This is when she's sitting
in the garden, aren't they? Yeah. It just tells that lovely story and that connection between them and what happened, and it all sort of is revealed to us, but revealed by your costume design.
I hope so. But just doing these drawings, I mean, I say I'm not an illustrator, but it's something I'm trying to get across the feeling I want in the film.
And then
the Kingsman.
And then the Kingsman. Gosh.
Yeah. Back to brutality.
And you yes, and you shared again this extraordinary picture of the author of the 39 Steps, John Buchan.
Yeah.
And so you showed this to Ray Fiennes.
Yeah.
And what happened?
Well, it was really odd. I had a last-minute meeting to try and meet him. And I remember running into town, and they said, he's only going to be there for 5 minutes. You have to get to this cafe or something. So I got there, and I had my little board. And I've been really thinking, I've got to be really concise. I have to say what I need. And I found this picture of John Buchan. I thought, oh, my God, this completely encapsulates exactly how I think this character is. You know, there's the sort of the restraint, the dignity, the fastidiousness. And so Rafe arrived, and I had 5 minutes with him. And I said, look, I have some boards. He went, oh, good, let's see them. And he went, oh, yes, that's him. And I went, but I just think this, he goes, yeah, that's him. And so it was so lucky. It doesn't always happen, but I felt so sure as well. I was like, God, this is exactly him. And Matthew also liked it as well, which is key. So yeah, it was a great first step into the journey of, you know.
It's a moment of the actor finding that.
And it's so useful for the actor.
Yeah.
To do that.
And you collaborated with the fashion line Huntsman.
Yes.
And they.
Actually, it was the owner of Huntsman recommended me to Matthew Vaughan, because he liked my work on The Crown, and I met him at the Crown wrap party.
Oh.
So it was lovely.
That's how it happens.
And so, yeah, I had this wonderful chance to work with Campbell, who's one of the head cutters there. And initially they were really nervous because obviously they're contemporary, but we went into the archives and we saw the lovely cuts, and he said, no, we really have to cut like this. And he was a bit nervous to start with, but then I went back a week later and he went, you know what, I'm really enjoying this. And so he cut. We did a lot in our own work for him, but he cut the key pieces, and actually, obviously, John Cosprock did some pieces, but he cut the key smart pieces for Harris Dickinson and Rafe. And then later on, I collaborated with him, and we made a collection, because they actually realised this could work in contemporary clothing. So we just switched it slightly and just moved some of the more extreme darts, shoulder seams, whatever. And yeah, I mean, it actually has reminded why I don't want to do fashion. Working back in the fashion industry. But it was good recognition of the costume design, and actually allowing you to be part of the produce that comes from it, the products that come from it.
The major influence.
Yeah, it needs to happen more. Frankly.
Yes, well, it does. So, yes, absolutely.
Yeah, this is lovely. This is when I do use an illustrator. This is a lovely Simon Thorpe did these beautiful illustrations for me, which are so close to how he ended up looking.
Yes, yeah.
And we did his lovely sunglasses, which we found in an original pair, which Cutler and Gross then put into production for us.
It's a fabulous suit.
My lovely assistant Alex found this great, it's an American suit. So we did this sort of double-breasted, which again, stunning. Everyone was so unsure about.
Oh,
the director, as well, saying, I don't know. And I went, I think it's really cool, and he's a well-travelled man, and he's cutting edge. You know. So eventually he wore it for quite a big scene. We had to make 5 of them, and they were really difficult to make because they were quite. It was a film we were shooting in. I can't remember where it was now, but it was warm, and so it had to be a light fabric, a summer fabric, but we didn't want linen because it's a nightmare, and so we found this very fine wool, but it was tricky.
It's a stunning suit. The cut is beautiful. It's just...
Yeah, we did that actually. No, I think that was a Campbell. I think that was... It was a Huntsman.
Okay.
Yeah. I think he was terrified.
Well, he carries it off.
Yeah, no, he did it really well.
Ta-da! So, here we are. Mamma Mia 2.
Such a variety.
Well, this is a costume designer's life, isn't it? I mean, you know, from...
Well, I think you can choose it to be,
these kind of extraordinary worlds. And then when Mamma Mia presents itself, Mamma Mia 2, it's a sequel and a prequel in one sort of narrative, because we go between the modern and 1979.
Yeah, I mean, I was drawn to it because of that. I liked the
79.
70s, yeah. I was hoping it'd be more 70s, really. But
So here's wonderful.
yeah, it was fun to do. I mean, we did use some original pieces, but again, often we needed to make 5 of this dress, so we can't use original pieces. So we might find an original piece and then create our own version of it. And same with the tiered skirts. I think we needed lots of those. But I actually went to LA. There's one, I don't know if it's here, but there was one beautiful dress I found, which I can't remember where she wears now, but it was a beautiful print. And I wanted to use it so much, but we actually had to recreate the print, and it was so hard because it was an all over. I can't remember what it is now. It sort of went from green to blue or something. It was phenomenally difficult, but we did do it, and it was such a beautiful dress. So it was fun to do. I mean, it was something completely different for me.
Had you seen the first one? Did you feel that you had to reference Anne Roth's costumes from number 1? Or
Well, Anne Roth had designed it, so I thought, well, if Anne Roth did that, I can certainly do this. You know, it's no shame. Yeah, we had to. Of course, we had to. And this, you know, the dungarees, whatever. So important
got a bit of
to
here, actually.
get right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we did. Of course, it had to make sense. But it was quite fun then looking at that character and how would she have been? What was she like in her youth?
How does Lily become Meryl? I mean,
yeah. So that was really good fun to do. And then the campness of having Cher and all that in there was just like, it was something.
But we talked about this is fantastic. Yeah. Is this something that you had printed yourself?
No, actually, I found this. It was.
Christine
I can't remember. It was an end of line from a design, but I just thought it was so beautiful and splashy and chaotic. I tried to have fun with it and try to give lots of character and colour. And we had this lovely thing of arriving with their hats forward with like 2 eyes.
Yes,
and then the lips on the lap. Trying to encourage them to do that. I wanted them. It's just like these 2 crazy women.
Yes.
2 quite different women as well.
Yes. Yeah. And then I love your sketches for the waiters, the kind of the
that
detail.
was my favourite scene, the Waterloo scene. And we had to make the waiters. I remember Jacqueline Duran told me that because I was saying, how did they all move in those wonderful things in Anna Karenina? They had stretch. I went, So then I made all the waiters with stretched suits, and of course it worked really great. And they kept so precisely in shape. I really like that scene. I think it's one of my favourites.
It works really well.
Inspired by the Napoleon.
And of course, it's a musical. Therefore, the clothes have to move, be danced in. People jump over tables.
Exactly. So all of these you have
picked up. All that work. The clothes have to do so much. And
you need to have at least 3 or 5 of each outfit so that they can, if anything goes wrong, or then they have a dance double or blah blah blah. So it's always an effort. I love the colour palette. It was really good fun. Actually, when we were running with this one, I remember she had like open sandals, and we actually ended up buying some shoes and painting toes on the front as she could run down the hill. Never saw it in the film.
We've got a lovely. Some more.
These are the
lovely waiters.
Again, it's lovely. It's this sort of Mediterranean. I don't know. It was just trying to get some sense of order to it and some sense of they're opening this new hotel. I wanted it to be really thought out and sort of local.
And then this is one.
We found those hats. Yeah. We found them in Selfridges. We were so happy.
Really?
Yeah. We were going like, oh gosh. Sometimes you have this one time you design something, and literally went to Selfridges and went, look at these. So we bought all of them. It was like really so lucky. They just went so well with the look. That's the good thing about contemporary.
Yes, so lucky sort of
sometimes
accidents,
I find something.
Some shopping accidents.
Otherwise you have to make.
And then.
Going off now.
So you have Cher. So we have to ask, what you've got Cher in the room. Does she come with her own thoughts and ideas?
Yes. And they change a lot.
Okay.
I flew to LA to meet her and with my assistant, my cutter, and we went to her house and she was charming, but we weren't allowed to measure her, so it was all that way for that. But I sort of I had a good look, obsessed, and I'd worked with her years earlier, so I had some mutual friends, so it was quite useful. And she has, of course, different ideas. She shares. She can. I remember it was the day that there was some funny eclipse. I can't remember. And I think everywhere went to this deep yellow colour. I can't remember what it was. And I went, Cher's coming. Cher's the day she landed. But she was spectacular. I mean, it was like a real pinch me moment when she started performing, and she's amazing. She's so cool, and then she's very, very sweet. And I actually used a friend of mine, who makes my jewellery, who's always on the verge of poverty, and I showed them to Sharon. She said, I only want to wear these, and I told her about Gloria, who's this amazing jeweler and sculptress, and then she put it on her website and publicised her.
Oh, fantastic!
So she has this real warmth to her
Yeah,
and a
yes.
real caring, and I like her very much.
Yeah, yes.
But it's quite scary as
Yeah,
well.
and then sort of then you've got the amazing Julie
I know,
Walters,
so
and
beautiful. And they were,
you just can do anything, and just
she's such fun.
But the sort of the magic exudes off the screen, and you just kind of go into this world, and it takes you along, and it's just joyous.
It's just again something different, and it was interesting to design, and something I hadn't really done before, and it's I don't know. I mean, but it was quite hard.
Yeah.
It was funny. Sometimes the films that look the most fun are not necessarily the most fun.
No.
But we all have our stories
of course,
and experiences.
Yeah. Thank you very much for this afternoon. Would you please put your hands together for the amazing Emmy and BAFTA winning Michele Clapton? Thank you. Thank you, Michele, for doing this.